Good morning. All right, we're ready to start the very last section in this chapter. So we're going to be talking about rural America. So we've been talking about the cities and living in the cities and the suburbs. So the last lesson, the greatest I think, is rural America. So let's look at page 104 in your reader book. And while you're turning to that, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the lesson from yesterday. Do you remember that phrase that Herbert Spencer made that he said, and it meant that the poor and those who are lower than the wealthy should never be helped because that would hurt us? Do you remember that phrase? Survival of the fittest. That's not a good phrase. That's not what he's talking about. Do you remember what his views, Herbert Spencer, do you remember what they called his views, like his thoughts? What did they call those? Social Darwinism, remember? Because he got a lot of his information from Darwin. Now, what was the new religion called that was made up by pastors that no longer believed the Bible was true? What did they call this new religion? Liberalism. And the new religion's gospel was called the social gospel. What was the focus of the social gospel? That society should be improved, that people should be helped, and that's going to be the best thing that you can do. And that's not right, is it? Because the best thing you can do is worry about their souls after they die, not their physical bodies while they're on the earth. That should be the case too. They should also be concerned about their salvation, but they're not. Do you remember the name of that big school that these pastors went to, and then they started teaching just the gospel? Princeton University, or Princeton Seminary, excuse me, not Princeton University, Princeton Seminary is what that was. All right, so let's look at page 104. Let's talk a little bit about rural America. You may wonder why I have this picture on the screen. That doesn't really look like rural America, does it? Well, let's go ahead and read here. As America grew, I'm not even so sure we need to keep that picture up there because I see something I don't like. So let's see if we can find a better picture of what I was going to show. I think it's called Chautauqua. I think that's how you pronounce it. Chautauqua. And I don't see any more pictures of it, so that's not going to help us, is it? Let's see. Chautauqua. Let's see if we can look at this. Chautauqua. What's it called? Well, we're going to leave it at that. I'm not so sure this is an actual good picture, but I guess it doesn't quite matter just yet. Now I see a better thing I'm seeing. All right, so let's go ahead and read about rural America. As America grew, make sure you follow along with me, just like you're reading. As America grew, many Americans still lived and worked in rural areas such as small towns and farms. At first, rural Americans welcomed changes. They thought the changes would help their farms and their towns prosper. But these benefits didn't always come. Businesses in the city often got and shipped goods more cheaply than businesses in small towns. A person in a small town might order an item from a city business. The item would be shipped to him by train. This helped shoppers. They had more choices. They could also buy their goods for less money. Businesses in small towns couldn't compete with the large city businesses. The farmers also faced trouble. They faced more competition with each other. Railroads made it possible for farmers to ship their crops to more places. Progress in industry made it possible for farmers to grow more food to sell. Since there were many crops, they became cheaper. This was good for people buying the food, but it was bad for farmers who didn't get as much business. Some people bought more from certain farmers. If farmers had borrowed money to buy seed or equipment, they needed business. They needed to make enough money to pay their debts. Farmers had many expenses. Farmers had to pay for the railroad to transport farm goods. Farmers also had to pay for warehouses, buildings for storing goods. A building where farmers stored grain is called a grange. The farmers were called grangers. Farmers wanted to change laws to favor themselves. They created the Granger movement. The farmers wanted the government to force railroads and warehouses to charge less money from farmers. They also wanted the government to print more paper money. But these were not good ideas for helping the nation as a whole. Most of these ideas did not become law. Rural Americans also distrusted some of the improvements that city people wanted. The farmers took care of their own roads, but city people who traveled on these roads complained. They said country roads were not good enough for long-distance travel. They wanted hard surface roads. The farmers didn't understand why they needed to pay more for the roads that other people wanted. Many farmers also resisted people's attempts to change the one-room schoolhouse. People wanted to divide it into grades, but many rural Americans didn't want this. They didn't want people to tell them what to teach in their schools. They wanted to remain in control of what their children learned. They were concerned about some of the new ideas taught in the schools. Rural Americans wanted schools to focus on reading, writing, and math. And that's just what they did. They would usually have in the little rural communities, they would have a schoolhouse. I used to have a schoolhouse a long time ago, and it had a couple of rooms in it, and I taught lots of kids in there and mine. But nonetheless, that was a while back. But they'd have these schoolrooms. They're just big rooms. And then the farmers that had children that went to that school, maybe each family would take turns letting the teacher stay with them. One of the farmers would make sure there was enough wood chopped so that she could keep the fire going and keep it warm inside. They would help build the desks and tables that they needed, and they'd try to keep the supplies coming. And this teacher would teach all the children, no matter what grade level. She'd probably, put the older ones in the back and the younger ones up front, and like that. I think they usually put girls on one side and boys on the other. And she would teach them all. But they taught mainly reading, writing, and math. And they only went to school when the mom and dad did not need them at home to help on the farm. But when it was time for farming, they needed the kids' help, then they'd go back and they would work with their parents. Let's read one of the last 2 pages. Look at page 106. American life was not all work and school. Americans now had more time to spend outside of work. They also had more time to spend outside of church. This was true in both the city and the country. Sometimes activities for entertainment replaced church. Sometimes they replaced volunteer work. Many of these activities were not wrong, but some Christians were concerned that they replaced better things. Some Christians decided to set up retreat centers, which were similar to camps. These retreat centers were places to enjoy fun activities, but the Bible and God were not left out. Christians could go to retreat centers to go hiking or boating. People might attend a concert there. The retreat centers offered Bible studies and sermons, and also held prayer meetings. So this on the screen, I'm thinking this is the inside of something like what it would be. Of course, this is present day, so all of this equipment and probably most of these chairs and stuff wouldn't have been there, and all of this up here, none of that had been invented. But there's a picture at the bottom of page 106 I wanted you to look at. That is a picture of, I guess you pronounce that, Chautauqua Hall of Philosophy. It was an open-air lecture hall. It was a retreat for Christians. People could go there and listen to concerts or listen to pastors preach. I think they actually started it so people could go there and they could start learning how to be good Sunday school teachers. And then they started doing it, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. But I believe that Chautauqua Hall is still there today. I had a picture of it on the screen, but there was something in it that I did not like, so I had to change the picture. You could ask your grandma that if you wanted to know. I don't want to talk to you about that myself. All right, let's look at page 107. It says conclusion. We're going to conclude this chapter. America grew during the late 1800s. The businesses founded during this time laid a foundation for American prosperity or success. American cities became places of opportunity, but cities were also places of crime and corruption. American businesses were not always just in their actions. Christians faced challenges from false teachers. These teachers wanted to change the Christian faith, but Christians still made many opportunities to help those in need. They had many opportunities to spread the gospel. This was a time period of challenges. It was also a time of opportunities. God blessed Americans with the ability to grow and expand their nation, but Americans needed to be careful that their growth was done in a way that pleased God. All right, so we're done with that chapter. So rather than go back and ask some questions, because there's really not that many questions to ask in this section, well, I guess there's a few. Let's look back at page 104. Page 104. No, I'm sorry, page 105. So what were some of the expenses that farmers had? Farmers had to buy their stuff. So what were some expenses that they had to pay out? They had to pay the railroad to transport their stuff. They had to buy their equipment that they used, seeds, that kind of stuff. Now, do you remember what the building was called where the farmers stored their grain? It's called a grange, and the farmers were called grangers. Why did farmers create the granger movement? You remember we just read that on page 105? They wanted to make the government make the railroad charge them less because they were charging them more, and they shouldn't have been. Why did rural Americans distrust some improvements that the city people wanted to do? They didn't want a whole lot of change, just a little bit. And when these city folks started coming into their rural areas and wanting to make changes, those country folks were like, I think you might better back out of here, Buster Brown. Turn to page 106. So how did the way Americans in the city and the country spent their time change? They had more time to do fun things, have hobbies, and go outside and that kind of thing. So what were some of the things? They started being entertained more. What were some of the things that suffered because of all this entertainment time? Church and volunteer work. That's right. So Christians saw the need, so they began to make these retreat centers, these places where Christians could come together and refresh and reevaluate everything. So each time there's a problem, the Christians saw that, and they came to, God blessed them to be able to do something to help, didn't they? Every time. All right, I want you to do page, in your work text, I want you to do page 44. And I want you to do it yourself. I'm going to grade it. It's just worth 10 points, but you'll have to use your book, I'm sure, to go back through it and, make sure that you get the right answers on these. So anyway, if you need any help on this page, then I want you to send me a message on Google Classroom, okay? All right, that's all for today.